Now, James Franklin is not the problem at Penn State, but for Penn State fans, we have to be honest about what he is as a coach in college football.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And as always, thanks so much for making this Locked On Crossover your first listen and watch every single day, as Locked On Nittany Lions and Locked On Smothered and Covered are teaming up today. I'm Zach Seyko with Locked On Nittany Lions. He is Barrett Sallee, well-versed in the media sphere. It's hard to miss his work, but he is the host of Smothered and Covered. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Well, that loss certainly stings for Penn State fans, but Barrett, I like that we get to, get the Penn State side of it, but also get a neutral perspective on what James Franklin is for Penn State and in college football. First and foremost, James Franklin is not the problem at Penn State. I think that James Franklin has set Penn State a lot further ahead, and I don't know how many other coaches would be able to help Penn State adapt with the times and work with the modernization of college football. But we have to be honest about who he is as a head football coach, that when it comes to X's and O's, routine, this is, I tried to neglect and maybe sugarcoat the big game and everything, and that, he only has one win against top 5 teams and he struggles against top 10 teams and everything else. But it showed up again. In the moment, I didn't think so, but when you look at it and you look at the middle 8, he was outcoached again by Notre Dame, this time Marcus Freeman, and someone that is younger than him and just starting to get acclimated at the top of the college football world.
Well, I think you have to give credit where credit's due. That's what Notre Dame's identity is. Like, they win the middle 8 almost consistently. So, Marcus Freeman is a good coach. Notre Dame's a good program. So, he got outcoached in the middle 8. I don't think there's any doubt about that, but I don't think there's any shame in that either, because you did what a lot of other teams had fallen victim to, and that's Notre Dame. And, the big game coach thing, 1-5 against top 5 opponents. It's hard to win against top 5 opponents, right? Yeah. So does James have his flaws? Sure. Every coach has his flaws. Kirby Smart has his flaws. Sometimes they do dumb things. Sometimes all of us do dumb things. Mm-hmm. But losing the middle 8, it sucked. I get it, but it's not something I care about. The thing with James Franklin and I've done. I'm 44, so I'm old. I said this in the Bowl Alliance era, the BCS era, and the 4-team playoff era. If you're in the discussion for a national championship, I should say, in mid to late November, you're doing fine. You're doing fine. If you don't make the playoff, if you don't make the BCS championship, cool. It's hard you have to have a lot of luck, right? And so James Franklin was always in that mix, right? He was top 10, top 12, always on the periphery. Were they in the national championship hunt every single November? No. Could you have did they have a chance? A lot of the times, yeah. And then now in the 12-team playoff, he pulls all the correct strings, gets him to the semifinal, damn near wins it. So, yes, he has had his issues, but I think they pale in comparison to virtually every other coach out there. And a lot of times, in a lot of instances, he makes the same mistakes that Nick Saban makes, Kirby Smart makes. He just doesn't have as talented of rosters, and that's just the fact of the matter. I mean, I go back and look. Yeah. Kirby Smart in the 2018 SEC championship game called a fake punt to Justin Fields at midfield in a tie game with Alabama and punt safe. There's no reason to do that, and yet it lost him an SEC championship. Nick Saban called a fake field goal in the 2018 national championship game against Clemson. They were in field goal safe. Dumb, very dumb. James Franklin really hasn't even had mistakes to that extent. To me, for Penn State, it's just more a fact that from a talent perspective, they haven't been able to overcome some of those decisions that leave you scratching your head.
So from that neutral perspective, it does feel like almost James Franklin has to coach, call, game plan for a perfect type of scenario. I'm not saying that they can't overcome anything or overcome any obstacles, but it is an uphill battle when you are facing the likes of an Ohio State that, just for what it's worth, And I've addressed that, Barrett. I don't think that from the Penn State side of things, because I definitely do not agree that Penn State should be moving on from James Franklin or that they're never going to fix anything, because they went from the sanctions and 7-5 and just not being a middle of the pack Big Ten team. That team should have been an afterthought for years to come. And then in 2016, they immediately have a breakthrough, and then it's just, oh well, they're always second place, or they're always behind Ohio State. And then Michigan and Jim Harbaugh showed up. And something that I always like to point out is, look how long it took Jim Harbaugh in Michigan to finally break through and get that national championship. Yep. It took them a decade. James Franklin's getting ready to go into year 12. But Penn State has adapted with the times, the facilities, the amenities, all these things behind the scenes that college football fans
not awful press box.
Yeah.
Get it out.
But people don't routinely think of that. It's of course on the field results matter. I don't know how much moral victories are going to matter to Penn State fans. Well, thank goodness we have a new stadium or stadium upgrades, but we're still losing to Ohio State by 3 to 7 points. But the gap is closed by so much. I know they're not winning those big games, but it used to be they lose by double digits, 3 scores to Ohio State, get absolutely floored by Michigan. And Penn State was right in the thick of it with Ohio State, Oregon, and they lost on a last-second field goal to Notre Dame.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Well, I look at it. You mentioned Jim Harbaugh. I'm going to go back a little further, right? Dabo Swinney at Clemson, right? He's a wide receivers coach. He gets thrust into the head coaching job when Bowden got fired. And for 3-4 years, he literally was on the hot seat, right? It was 6-6. It was 7-5. Clemson fans were like, oh, this is the same thing as Tommy Bowden. And they were right, but they stuck with him. They went to a BCS Bowl in 2011. They went to a BCS Bowl in 2013, and then they became Clemson. And they sort of faced the same challenges that Penn State has faced with James Franklin. Roster was not as good as what it needed to be, in their case, Florida State at that time. Coaching was still sort of figuring itself out. The game was evolving, and they were shocking. Clemson was a little late to the party in how things evolved, but they got there. And to me, that's sort of the same thing. I mean, I know Penn State fans are not going to love to hear this, but in the modern era, Penn State isn't a blue blood, right? Mm-hmm. Players that are going to signing at a high school, they don't even remember Penn State as anything other than just a pretty good Big Ten program, right? And it's hard to overcome that, right? When you do overcome it and you have the resources that a Penn State has, or resources that Clemson has, or Michigan has, or Georgia has, it comes. Now, another perfect example of what Penn State is, I think, in the minds of a lot of people, a lot of high school kids, they're Georgia under Mark Richt, if you remember that. Always kind of there. Always sort of in the mix, maybe in early November. Sometimes they catch lightning in a bottle. In 2012, they would have destroyed Notre Dame in the national championship game, just like Alabama did. So you kind of got, blocked, kind of like Penn State gets blocked all the time. I think but again, they figured it out. A lot of it had to do with also recruiting base, sort of youngsters coming up and growing up with Georgia. But that there's precedent for it. And I think it's important to remember that these juggernauts that existed had to go through a lot of the same things that Georgia did, or that Penn State's going through. Even Alabama, hammered by sanctions in the mid-2000s. They were a 6-6 program at best for the majority of the early part of that century. And now Saban did what Saban did, and they Saban was 6-6 in his first season, right? It takes a while.
Barrett, you bring up an excellent point about the comparison of Georgia and Mark Richt. You can see what happens if you make that decision, that Georgia and the coach moved on from each other. Sure. and look where Georgia is. But there's also the other side of it. Look what Nebraska did when they didn't stick by its head coach. So let's talk about that. What is the time frame? When does James Franklin need to absolutely bring in the best of the best results, or it's time to move on? We'll talk about that. Plus Drew Aller as a quarterback for Penn State in 2025. That is coming up next here on this Locked On Crossover. And today's show is brought to you by Game Time. You got to download the Game Time app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks, and that makes getting tickets for events even easier than before. Game Time Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on incredible seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. And that's from everything: sporting events, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. You can use Game Time Picks to find tickets for any upcoming game. You can browse through the deals like it's a breeze, and you'll find great value on all kinds of seats at any venue. And then there's the super deal. That will give you the best value for the event. You can see the seat views before buying, and the app will show you the total upfront cost with no surprise fees at checkout. And you can also look at tickets at gametime.co. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account, use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Zach Seyko of Locked On Nittany Lions, Barrett, Sallee of College Football Smothered and Covered here on the Locked On Podcast Network, teaming up for this Locked On College crossover. And Barrett, I think James Franklin deserves even more time. And I know Penn State fans are probably going to be disgruntled that I say that, I'm just a big James Franklin supporter.
Fire everybody immediately.
It's not going to get you anywhere, and I don't think people realize just how much support and how much of a base that James Franklin has actually within the program. And there's finally alignment, something that I've always discussed, and that James Franklin tries to subtly hint at. But the athletic director, I'm not saying that formally Sandy Barber was standing in the way, but she wasn't actually going out of her way to help him. Same thing with the politics and the president. Now Neely Bendapudi and Pat Kraft and James Franklin all have alignment as far as what needs to be done for Penn State to be a perennial college football powerhouse in this modern day and age. But as you pointed out and say, hey, Mark Richt and Georgia moved on from one another, and look where they are now. But Nebraska did that a while back, and now they're in college football purgatory, and they can't seem to get it right.
Bo Pelini sounds really good. The Nebraska, well, maybe
doesn't he?
Now because Matt Rule, but Bo Pelini sounds really good right now.
Yeah. So what is the time frame? I don't think that James Franklin teams and this program are going to absolutely fold and crumble to a point where they're 8-4, 7-5, and they take this significant regression. But the window is now. 2025 is another chance to win a national championship, and then 26 and 27, you at least have I guess some positives to fall back on, but it's not the same to a point where, Penn State's going to be in the national, because I thought these were legitimate college football playoff contenders in 24 and 25. Can't exactly say the same thing about 26 and 27. So does James Franklin have an unlimited time frame unless it's significant regression? Or if he continues to go 10-2 and make the 12-team playoff, that's good enough.
That's fine. 10-2 and a 12-team playoff. Almost every fan base in the country would take that. I would say every fan base outside of Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State should be okay with that, because you have a chance. You're giving yourself a chance every single year. You're giving and in the Big Ten, it's really hard to go 10-2. And I think for James Franklin and for Penn State, like I said, slow progression, slower than some. But think about what this run could do, right? You have everybody noticing Penn State, right? Everybody watched that game. I don't know what the ratings were, but I'm sure they were high. I was stuck in Miami for 2 days, so I just kind of tuned out everything, which was a lot of fun. Let me tell you about that. I know the decon course at Fort Lauderdale Airport better than anybody. If I was there longer, I was going to buy some Swarovski jewelry, some new luggage, some cologne from the duty-free shop. I was awful. But I mean, think about it. Everybody saw it. Everybody knows what Penn State's capable of. They're a field goal away from going to the national championship game. Yeah. They're going to send a ton of dudes to the NFL, whether it's this year or next year, contributors from this team that people saw, that players saw, that high school players can now sort of recognize as, hey, I could do that. Or transfer players can say, hey, I can do that. So it's one of those things where we live in an instant gratification society, right? And I think after what happened last Thursday, it's like, okay, got to have it now. Well, you're still going to get players. You're still going to develop players. Still going to get high school players. And that's going to happen quicker, and you're going to get better players now because of what happened. So just that run, two wins and then a last second loss will open the eyes to everybody associated with college football. So, I think at that point you're going to get to a program where you're in the mix every November, mid-November. You have a chance. Might not get there every year, fine. But 9-3, 10-2 for a program like Penn State, and this is not a slight to Penn State, but again, they're not viewed as a blue blood by anybody that actually matters, and that's the players. They just aren't. And so right now, if you're in the mix every year, what more can you ask for? Because Penn State right now, look, Penn State wasn't a top, let's be honest, Penn State was not a real top 4 team, right? They finished in the top 4, both in the playoff and in the final college football playoff rankings, but it was almost because of lack of options. And they dang near made the national championship game. But I think more importantly, they got an easy draw, right? So if you get to the playoff, what happens if you get an easy draw? You can win a national championship. And look, Notre Dame's Notre Dame's not because they played Georgia, but it's easy to move on if you get in. So, man, everybody wants to be a juggernaut, right? Everybody wants a dynasty, and the truth is there shouldn't be a dynasty in college football. There's too many teams, too many resources. Players are spread all around the country. Alabama should not happen. Clemson should not happen. Georgia probably will not happen anymore. So why should Penn State expect that? Why should anybody expect that?
Yeah, Penn State. I agree with you. I think that from the competition standpoint, it is diluted, and that is a good thing for the sport, because you used to go into it that Alabama's basically a pseudo NFL team. Georgia's basically a minor league NFL team, and it's just everybody else. You knew what the expectation was, or it was Alabama and Georgia in conjunction with one another, and then everybody else. I felt like there were 6 different teams that could legitimately be a national champion, and that's the point of the 12-team format. Barrett,
the transfer portal. Think about Georgia, right? We thought Georgia with all those juggernauts this year. They had no wide receivers that could catch the ball. They did not have a number 1 running back. They had defensive issues at times. And think about Alabama. They didn't have a running back they trusted. They had issues in the secondary. So you don't have the power. Like the transfer portal has drastically changed those teams because they don't have the dudes that will wait for 2 years that are just flat out studs.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. One of Georgia's best players last year, Jamon Dumas-Johnson, played for Kentucky. And he was going to start. It's a different world.
And that was something that people pointed out, that Georgia and Alabama or other SEC teams that were really competing for the top can't hide these players anymore on their depth chart, and they don't have the length. These superstars that, they will wait a year or 2, but now they can go make some significant NIL deals, and they can transfer without any consequences and go play immediately, going back to your point about instant gratification in a different regard, but it's kind of that same thing immediately. Yep. What can I do? What can I do for myself immediately? Now, Penn State, I think the way that most people talk that this was a lost cause, that Penn State had no chance, but they were right there with all of Ohio State, Oregon, and they were 3 points away despite all the circumstances and despite not the best performance by their quarterback, Drew Aller. We're going to look ahead a little bit, assessing Drew Aller's performance, but also looking how he can rebound in 2025 and at least capitalize from what hopefully is a learning experience. That's coming up next on this Locked On Crossover. And today's show is also brought to you by WayFair. After the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little TLC. I always find that decluttering and refreshing my space helps me get back into a routine. And whether you're tidying up, cleaning out, or just want to give your space a new look to start the new year, WayFair has everything you need and all within your budget. You can currently look for furniture and a huge selection that makes it easy to find the pieces that will fit your style and budget. And one of the best parts, the free and hassle-free delivery, even for larger items. Wayfair's site is so easy to navigate, and you'll find everything you need in no time. There's something for every style and every home, no matter the space or the budget, and Wayfair makes it easy to tackle your New Year's home goals with endless inspiration for every kind of space. this. Give your home the refresh it needs with WayFair. Head over to wayfair.com right now. That is WayFair.com. WayFair, every style, every home. Drew Aller, I think by far had the worst game of his career, honestly. And I know Michigan 23 and Ohio State 2023 are certainly not flattering, Barrett, but given the circumstances, given the consequences, given that a national championship berth was on the line, certainly when you combine the two respects together, it was Drew Aller's worst game. The analytics back it up. I always like to look to Pro Football Focus to see, okay, just, let's put this performance really into perspective. And it was not good. I know that Drew Aller will tell you that it wasn't good. Now, I was pretty harsh on Drew Aller in the moment, and you said, no, let's take a step back. There were a lot of other factors here. Hey, James Franklin lost the middle eight. Drew Aller didn't exactly have his best game, but the wide receivers didn't give him any other options outside of Tyler Warren to throw to. Just as that five-star quarterback, as someone who's going into his third season of college football, second consecutive year starting, those easy passes, missing Nicholas Singleton not once but twice, missing Tyler Warren on some wide open routes as well. It was those routine throws and the breakdown in mechanics and footwork that really made me say, okay, this hinges on Drew Aller here. But in that moment, Barrett, let's go back to that game. What was working for him, or if there was anything working for him, or what happened? What led to the breakdown for Aller?
I think it was just frustration that kind of was a culmination of the entire season. And what I mean by that is, look, you guys know, Penn State didn't have receivers. It was Tyler Warren and then
past 2 years.
Past 2 years. Yeah, Keandre Lambert-Smith was probably not used very well at Penn State after what we saw catching passes from Peyton Thorne this past year. But I think the sigh, I get it. No, I mean, look, if you're Drew Aller, he's talented, right? I think everybody knows he's talented. You're frustrated because you can't get a receiver other than Tyler Warren. The Notre Dame pass rush, even though it didn't have its best day, I mean, he knows what's up. He knows this is a sketchy situation against these guys, and if they start teeing off on me, things are going to go bad, right? And it's all season, right? It's a culmination of everything that he felt like he had to do too much. And I think when it comes to mechanics, when you have a situation like that, your mechanics are the first thing to go. Like that's just, your mechanics go quicker than your brain. And I if they just find a little bit of help, I think it'll go a long way, because like you mentioned, like we talked about Thursday night in the postcast, that it was his worst game, but there's still, I think that you see the talent, what he's capable of. You've seen it in spurts this past year, especially, downfield to Tyler Warren some of those times. So, it's not all on him. I don't think the staff, Colton Ecke and that crew, put him in a good spot in that game. And that's surprising because of, how he started the season off against WVU. I thought that was, a good sign of things to come. He's still talented. He needs help. It takes a lot to be successful in this game against great competition. And he has what it takes. He needs wide receivers, and he needs a little bit more composure when things start to go south. And I think in that game specifically, it was more because of frustration than anything else.
I think it's easy to be, because I saw the same thing. A dominant victory against West Virginia, and an excellent indicator of signs to come against USC. I mean, I wasn't necessarily expecting that, because that's a top 5 Notre Dame defense. And honestly, even better than that, if they are at full strength, that's easily one of Ohio State and Notre Dame, arguably the two best defenses made the national championship game.
Yes.
And for Drew Aller to see, the come from behind victory on the road against USC, not making those same routine mistakes that in years past, because they don't routinely. I don't know if they win that game against Minnesota. I don't know if they win that game in USC.
Think about the Oregon loss. Yeah. They should have gotten smoked. That they looked like they were going to get smoked, and Drew kept them in, among other people.
Yeah. So Aller, it is not the problem either, but definitely did not have his best game, and that's just putting it lightly. As a Penn State fan, I would still want him as the starting quarterback in 2025 because you don't get luxuries like this very often because of the transfer portal, because of NIL, because of that instant gratification. Someone that is truly committed to a program and a head coach in James Franklin. And Mike Yurcich was fired. That was his guy in the recruiting process. You mean to tell me in the portal that any other my offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach isn't here? I can go off and go to a different program and get a fresh start. And Drew Aller stuck by Penn State. He will be a fourth-year college football player. That doesn't happen very often because of his talent. He would naturally go off to the NFL. Whether we want to debate, is he a number one overall pick at some point in time? Is he a first-round talent? He would have been drafted probably in the first or second round of this year's NFL draft in 2025, and he's coming back for a senior season. That's the best setup that Penn State could ask for. So looking at this one of the bullet points here in the show is Penn State stuck, or will they have a breakthrough in 20? I mean, there's nothing to be stuck about.
They already had a breakthrough.
They had the breakthrough, and I think in 2025, going into the postseason will be in 2026, they'll be in the exact same spot where you should realistically expect them to end up in the national semifinal.
Yeah, for sure. Because look at what their competition is in the Big Ten, right? Aside from Jeremiah Smith, Ohio State's losing a ton. Right? They're losing a ton.
Good.
Good. Michigan, Michigan's Michigan. Oregon is, they're losing Dylan Gabriel. They've got some other dudes that are going away. USC still can't tackle. The Big Ten. Look, if you're top three Big Ten, you're in. And Penn State has been top three Big Ten for decades, it seems like. And so I don't see why it would change next year, because of all the teams that are sort of, I know Penn State's going to lose some really special players, but from a quantity standpoint, you got a lot coming back, which goes a long way. So I don't think there's any reason why fans should expect anything other than where Penn State is right now. If you go undefeated, you're just an unbelievable team. Oregon is not the norm, right? Yeah. If you have two losses and you go in 10-2, I mean, hell yeah, take that.
Ohio State. That's what Ohio State did this season. They went. Yeah. I know that's a different caliber of team, but they don't get in on that 4-team playoff, and probably not the 6-team playoff either. If they just make a small expansion, the 12-team playoff allowed for a Notre Dame and an Ohio State to get in. So if Penn State goes 10-2. We'll see. 9-3 Clemson gets in because of the ACC championship game, but an at-large 9-3, we'll see where that goes. And honestly, I think the college football playoff is expanding again before it stays. It's closer to expanding before it stays at that 12-team playoff for years and years to come. Barrett, let's finish up here briefly. What does Penn State need to do because I think Penn State's biggest enemy is itself in those moments. So what can Penn State do within the moment to overcome that hump and be in the national championship as opposed to losing the big game year in and year out?
Well, it's just like life, right? What do you learn more from, your successes or your failures? Your failures. Always. You learn what not to do. I mean, it's very, if it were easy, then everybody would do it, right? It would just be the way, but you have to figure it out on the fly. So just learn your lessons. And James, look, I've known James for a little bit now. He did that at Vandy, and he won 9 games at Vandy 2 years in a row. That's that's almost impossible. He learned his lessons, and he's never been in that situation before. Players hadn't been in that situation before. Now they know what it feels like. Next year when they get there, they know the success they had and the failures that they had, because they had a ton of success early in the playoff, right? So that's really all there is to it. It's a simple answer, but it's an answer that's applied not just in college football, not just in sports, but life in general.
Thank you so much to everyone who checked out this Locked On crossover episode. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments section. Be a part of the conversation. My name is Zach Seyko of Locked On Nittany Lions. He is Barrett Sallee of College Football Smothered and Covered on the Locked On Podcast Network. Barrett, I'm so glad we got to do this crossover and have a follow-up conversation about this Penn State football team. So thank you so much for helping me out.
Yes, sir. Let's do it again.
And thanks again for checking out this Locked On crossover with Locked On Nittany Lions and College Football Smothered and Covered with Barrett Sallee, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Check out both shows on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe for the latest episodes. Please leave a like on this episode, share it with friends and family, and let us know your thoughts down in the comments section. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.